Hi friends, welcome back to the Christian Educators Hub. I'm Bob Dyer, Director of Biblical Worldview at Trinity Christian Academy in Addison, Texas. What you believe about the future shapes how you live in the present, and that definitely includes how you teach. If you believe life is ultimately random, temporary, and meaningless, you'll teach differently. If you believe the world is all there is, you will educate primarily for success, achievement, comfort, and survival. But the Christian worldview tells a far, far bigger story. A story that doesn't end in brokenness. A story that doesn't end in despair. It's a story that ends in restoration. There is hope. One of the unique realities of Christianity is that the Bible begins with creation and ends with restoration. The final chapters of Scripture aren't about escape from the world. They're about renewal. So if we were to look at Revelation 21, the first verse says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth." And then Revelation 21 verse 5 says, "Behold, I am making all things new." Not some things, all things. And that is incredibly important because many Christians unconsciously think salvation is mainly about leaving earth and going somewhere else. But if we look at Scripture, it presents something much, much bigger. God isn't abandoning His creation. He's redeeming and restoring it. And in Revelation 21, the word new doesn't necessarily mean entirely different in substance. It carries the idea of renewal, restored, transformed, made right. And just as redemption restores people, God will ultimately restore creation itself. Paul says in Romans 8:21, creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption. Creation is groaning now, but it will not groan forever. And this matters for education. And so here's the question. What does that have to do with teaching? Well, everything. Because restoration changes what we believe education is ultimately for. If the goal of life is merely worldly success, then education becomes primarily about achievement, status, performance, competition, career preparation. And while preparation matters, the Christian worldview calls us to something deeper. The goal isn't merely success. I mean, Christian education isn't simply about preparing students for college or careers or financial stability. Those things matter, but they aren't ultimate. The deeper goal is formation. Who are students becoming? What are they loving? What are they worshiping? So, how are they learning to think about truth, about beauty, about goodness, about justice, identity, and purpose? Those are worldview questions. I mean, think about a builder laying the foundation for a cathedral. You know, some cathedrals took generations to complete. The builders knew they might never see the finished structure, but they still laid stones carefully. Why? Because they understood they were building towards something greater than themselves. That is restoration thinking. You teach differently when you understand your work connects to eternity. This gives us as Christian educators perspective. This means Christian educators must resist short-term thinking. Modern culture constantly pushes the immediate, instant results, measurable outcomes, quick success, visible achievement. But formation is often slow. Character develops slowly. Wisdom develops slowly. Faithfulness develops slowly. And sometimes the fruit of what you do won't fully appear for years. And that can be discouraging unless you understand restoration. Because restoration reminds us that God is still working. So, let's look at Scripture. Galatians 6:9. It says, "And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in what? Due season we will reap if we do not give up." So we notice here that there is a season of sowing and there is a season of waiting, and eventually there's a harvest. Christian education often feels like sowing season. You teach, you correct, you encourage, you repeat truth, you pray, you invest. And sometimes you wonder if anything is truly taking root. But restoration reminds us that God works over time. That this also changes how we see students. Students aren't projects. They are eternal souls, image bearers, young men and women who will one day stand before God. And that reality should produce humility, seriousness, compassion, patience. It should also remind us that students are always becoming something. No one stays spiritually neutral. Everyone is being formed. And the question always is, formed towards what? And one of the reasons human beings long for justice and peace and beauty and wholeness is because we were made for restoration. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says, "He has put eternity into man's heart." Human beings ache for permanence because we were created for eternity. We long for things to be made right because deep down we know the world is not the way it's supposed to be. And that longing itself points beyond this world. And this applies to our subjects. This affects every discipline. History reveals humanity and its longing, flourishing, while repeatedly demonstrating humanity's inability to achieve it apart from God. And then literature. Stories resonate because they echo themes of loss and sacrifice and redemption and restoration and hope. The greatest stories move us because they reflect the greater story. Science reflects both the beauty of creation and the reality that creation is currently fractured and awaiting renewal. And then art. Beauty matters because beauty points beyond itself. It awakens longing. It reminds us there is something more. And so, again, though, we have a warning for us. Even as we looked at creation and the fall and now redemption, one danger in Christian education is becoming so focused on immediate academic performance that we neglect long-term spiritual formation. Grades matter, excellence matters, discipline matters, but none of those are ultimate. A student can achieve highly and still not know truth, still not love God, still not understand reality rightly. And that should sober us. So ask yourself honestly, if we're talking about restoration, what am I ultimately aiming for in students? Am I preparing them merely to succeed in culture or to live faithfully within it? Am I helping students build resumes or wisdom? Do my students leave my classroom merely informed or increasingly formed? You know, friends, we can't underestimate the significance of our work. In a distracted culture, you're helping students learn wisdom. In a confused culture, you're helping students learn truth. In a hopeless culture, you are pointing students toward eternal hope, the restoration. And that matters more than most people realize. So, the Christian story ends with restoration, not chaos, not despair, not meaninglessness. Restoration reminds us that history is moving somewhere. God is making all things new. And when you teach with that reality in mind, you stop seeing education as merely preparation for life and begin seeing it as formation for eternity.